Okay, so we were just talking about the influence of hormones on bone growth. Now, what cells, I want to touch on before we get into the next slide. I want to talk about the various bone cells that we've mentioned before. We had said that we have osteoblast with a B. And what do? They produce bone matrix. And we have osteoclast with a C. And what they do is they dissolve bone matrix. And it ends up that we have two other hormones that are going to be playing a role in bone growth, but it's really more a role in bone remodeling. And the reason for that is that calcium ions are really important in many physiologies, especially those related to muscle contraction and nerve impulses. Well, you're going to die if your heart doesn't continue pumping. That's a muscle. You're going to die, right? So it's really critical. So your body puts preference or puts a higher priority on maintaining calcium ion levels at the appropriate level over even bones, the structural component of your body. So we have this thing called calcium homeostasis, and we have two different hormones that are going to be controlling it. So when you have when your calcium levels in the blood are low, one of your endocrine glands, something called the parathyroid gland, is going to secrete parathyroid hormone. And what it does is it stimulates one of those two types of bone cells that I mentioned, the osteoclast with a C. What do these do? They absorb bone matrix, and as a result, it elevates blood calcium ion levels. So, and it has some effects in the kidney as well, causing you to not lose calcium ions in your urine. And it helps with absorption of calcium in your diet. And so the influence on blood calcium levels is for them to increase. And we're talking about bones right now, so we're focusing on this one aspect, the osteoclast activity. So parathyroid hormone stimulates osteoclast activity, which is going to dissolve bone matrix. And this happens when you have low blood calcium levels. Okay, well, since this is calcium homeostasis, and we'd said homeostasis means maintaining a physiology around a set point, that means we got to have the other side of the equation, right? So the other hormone that comes into play here is something that is produced by the thyroid gland, not the parathyroid, thyroid, and this is something called calcitonin. And so when you have high calcium levels, the other side, when you have high calcium levels, calcitonin is released. And what does it do? It stimulates osteoblast to build bone matrix. And so your bone, we say, bone is highly dynamic. That means it's changing. So the bone density is always changing because we have to maintain calcium ion levels at the proper level. Calcium homeostasis. Okay, so we have blood calcium levels are going to be playing a role in this, a big role in this, but also the demands that you place on your bones. If you're a couch potato and you don't do anything physical, your bones will be less dense than if you're an athlete who's out there throwing the baseball at over 100 miles an hour. I bring up that point because there was a famous pitcher, Nolan Ryan was his name, and he had some bone density studies done, sort of an academic thing. It wasn't because he, had an injury, but they found that his pitching arm, he had an incredibly dense bones. His bones in the arm that he stressed all the time because he threw the ball so hard, had incredibly dense a matrix structure. And the law that controls this is something called Wolff's Law. And it's a very simple law. It says that your bone density is partially controlled by the demands you put on your bones. So if you work them hard, they're going to be denser than if you don't do anything physical. So bone is not static. That's what we say here. All right, we have some other nutritional kind of stuff that we can talk about. So vitamin D. So we were just talking about the skin, right? And we'd said ultraviolet radiation stimulates the release of vitamin D. And what did we say it does? It helps you absorb calcium ions in your diet. Well, so bone is what? The bone matrix is calcium phosphate. And we had said bone consists of calcium phosphate. It's like the concrete. And then if you think of a building being built, a skyscraper or any place where you see them pouring concrete, they always put some metal rods in there. They call that rebar. And so you need both of these to have a really strong building, right? Well, bones are the same way, but we don't have rebar, we have collagen fibers. So we have these fibrous proteins in this matrix. So when we talk about vitamin D, it is involved in increasing blood calcium levels by absorption from your diet, and then that will allow you to have stronger bones, right? So vitamin D is there for helping you build bone matrix. Now, what about another one? What about something related to the collagen? That would be vitamin C. Vitamin C is required for protein synthesis. Collagen is a fibrous protein, so you have to have your vitamin C as well. And then there's one other vitamin we mentioned. It's vitamin A, and it's involved in bone remodeling, and it's required for those osteoclasts, with a C, to be able to do their thing to absorb or digest the bone matrix to release calcium ions. Let's see what's next. Okay, I'm going to stop right here and we'll come back and talk about broken bones.